We only offer basic language courses, Spanish 1 through 3. Once in a while we teach Spanish 100, but not very often. It depends on if we have enough students that want the course because they're going on to main campus and they're planning on doing a minor in Spanish, then we'll offer Spanish 100. If we don't have enough students, then we'll offer it as an independent study so that they can get it. As you know, Spanish 1 through 3 are basic language courses, as are all of the foreign language courses, and so they're very different on what students' expectations are. So flipping the classroom for a higher level class, or i.e. above a basic general ed course, may be different than flipping it for a lower level course, okay? And I'm actually going to talk a little bit about that. So what I'm planning on discussing today are what is a flipped classroom, and most of you probably already know what that is. I'm going to go with a very basic generic definition of it. And then flipping the foreign language classroom, which I'm going to claim that it's natural to do that. It's just natural to do that, and we'll talk about that. SRTEs and student reactions, and then finally any conclusions, any questions that you might ask. As I say, please do not hesitate to just interrupt me while I'm going along, okay? So what is a flipped classroom? There's a shift in teaching and learning. So you're throwing your lectures into or outside of the classroom, and then bringing the activities and the practice into the classroom, okay? And you're providing, especially in the language classrooms, you're providing opportunities for activities and practice during the classroom time with minimal lecture. At times you may need to answer, and you'll see on the handout that I gave you, I always start off by asking, does anyone have any questions? And even though I provide 5 minutes for that, sometimes it will take a few minutes longer than 5. If it's going to take a lot of time, for example, if someone says, I don't understand a grammar point, then I'll generally request that the student talk to me. I'll do a general review quickly and then ask that the student talk to me outside of class about that grammar point or the vocabulary, whatever it is that they're having a hard time with. Okay, why should we flip the foreign language classroom? It's just natural to do, because what is it that we're trying to get students to do in a foreign language? What are the main goals and the objectives in a foreign language? Well, first of all, we want communication in the language, right? So we want them to have the ability to understand, so they have to be able to listen, which is the perfect opportunity in the classroom, is to listen. And we want them to be able to read. For example, if they go to a foreign language or a foreign country, they need to be able to understand street signs at the most basic level, or understand a menu at the most basic level. To be able to ask directions, okay, the reading, and then going from there, being able to communicate. So they have to be able to speak, they have to be able to ask questions, they have to be able to ask for directions, for example, or even be able to ask where the bathroom is at a more basic level, okay? They also have to be able to write. For example, if they're trying to get information or if they're trying to exchange money, they need to be able to read a form and then be able to fill out that form. It may be basic information, but some things are written differently than they would normally write. As simple as being told to write the date, because the date, here we write month, day, year, and on forms, many forms, it asks for day, month, year, and students need to understand those differences. And then, and probably one of the most important things is that they understand other cultures. I don't know how many of you know much about Du Bois, but we do not have, we're not ethnically diverse. We have 1% of our population in our area that is not white Caucasian, okay? So there's no diversity there. So we need to bring that into our classroom so our students understand that there's more to the world than just the small community that they live in. Because many of them don't understand that. We bring students abroad during the spring break, just so that they can get the idea that there's more than just what they live in. Many of our students haven't been on an airplane. Many of our students haven't been to state college. Okay, and so they need to understand that, you know, especially those that are transferring to University Park, even, that when they get here, it's going to be a different culture because there's more diversity than there is at Du Bois. Okay, questions so far? Yeah.
My question: how is this different from communicative language teaching?
You're going to see that what I'm going to say is I've been doing this for a while, even though it was not called flipping the classroom at the time. The difference is that in a communicative language classroom, generally you have some teaching of grammar on the board, such as verb paradigms. In the flipped classroom, they're doing all of that outside of the classroom. You don't do any of that on the board, do all that stuff on the board. You literally are practicing, using what you've studied. Okay, and I think that'll become a little bit clearer once we look at the model. Okay, other questions? Okay. All right, so I want to talk about my flip, and I'm sort of going to give you a brief overview of what that flip has been. As I said, I've always sort of used a semi-flip because since I started teaching, especially at Du Bois in 2000, the students weren't used to having to practice. They were used to taking their textbook, opening their textbook, repeating the vocabulary with the teacher, the instructor, and then literally following activity by activity by activity, the practice, and then the book set up so that there's practice activities and then there's conversational activities. So they would sit and write out the practices and then go through the answers to the practices. Get to a conversation and have it be a whole class conversation where you could sort of, know what question you were going to have to answer because there'd go the first person, the second person, the third person. When I came, I didn't do that because that's not, I learned to teach using a communicative approach. And therefore, my classes have always been more communicative in the sense that, they would take their book and they would do all the practice activities outside of class, come in, I would ask if there were any questions, they would answer yes or no, I would answer any questions that there were, and then we would start communicative activities. So I've sort of had a semi-flip the whole time I've been here. Then I took the plunge in 2011 and went to a complete flip. So that students did everything outside of class, the lectures, the readings, the explanations. I put a lot of stuff in writing for them with examples so that they can see, so that they know what to expect when they come into the classroom. So what happens in 2011? Well, at that time, as in all the languages, I believe all the languages here are either 4 or 6 credits, depending on if you have the intensive or the regular class. We were teaching the 4-credit class 4 days a week, an hour a day, 50 minutes a day. And there were some problems because, again, we're talking about students who see it as just a requirement, that the only reason why they're taking it is because they need it for their BA degrees, and they don't necessarily want to learn a language. Okay, there's a bit of closed-mindedness, and we have to change the culture. We had to change the culture so that students understood that it was more than just a requirement. That yes, there were reasons that they might need that Spanish, or that French, or that German, or the Arabic, or whatever language that they were taking. That they need that, even if it's just because they have a student that comes into their classroom, or a classmate that is from another country, they need to be able to communicate a little bit, okay? So we had a 4-day-a-week class flip, and then in 2012 to present, we switched, okay? Because there were some frustrations in 2011 in the sense that students weren't necessarily coming to class very prepared. So it was a lot of not being able to do those communicative activities that we wanted to do. And because they hadn't learned the vocabulary, they hadn't listened to the lecture or the reading that they needed to listen to in order to be able to do the discussion or to do the practice that they were supposed to be doing. So in 2012, we switched. I decided that we would do a flip, but the way we would try to help that flip is to make it a hybrid class, okay? So by making it a hybrid class, what we do is we have class 2 days a week, and they do their outside work, the lectures, the other 2 days a week. And that's the model I'm going to show you today. This has helped tremendously for a number of reasons. Now, the first reaction that I've gotten in the past is, well, you're taking away 2 days of instruction. Well, not really. Not if you're flipping it, it's not really taking it away. What it's really doing is opening up those other 2 days for true communication, because they're focused, they've prepared the day before, they're focused on coming to class and knowing that they're going to need to use certain information, because I don't throw the whole chapter at them. I give them specific things that they need to do that would be for the next day's activities, with the idea being that the activities build one upon the next activity until they have a cumulative activity at the end, in which it might be a speaking activity, or it might be a writing activity, or it might be a combination of the two, of speaking and writing, all right? In addition, and this is what's really important, because what you have, you may think, this doesn't seem complete. The missing part to that is, in addition to the flip, the lectures, etc., that they have to do, they also have homework, regular class homework to do. And that sort of fills in those blanks, okay? So that they know what she's given me for the lecture part should be equal to or a little bit more than an hour to 2 hours worth of work. And in addition to that, I know I need to do what I call the drill and kill, okay? The foundation, learning those grammar points, and practicing even more the grammar and the vocabulary, especially the vocab. The textbook that I use, in my opinion, unfortunately, the grammar doesn't always, the way it's presented doesn't always mesh with what the topic is. So for example, the topic for the one I'm going to talk to you about is housing and houses. The grammar point is present tense verbs, but in the activities, they don't put those present tense verbs into the topic of house, okay? So their homework is to learn those present tense verbs, and then part of their, the flip is being able to use those verbs and use that vocabulary within the context of the module itself. So it's literally taking what they've done as their drill and kill and being able to put that into the right context, okay? So it became a hybrid class. Sorry. Okay, so this brings me to the example that you have here. And hopefully I'm going to be able to show you the whole thing. We've been having a few computer issues here. Okay, so if we look at this, you'll see that what happens with our textbook is we cover between 6 and 7 chapters per semester, which I think is probably about average for most of you that teach languages. So we have approximately 2 weeks for each chapter. And with that extra week being one that makes up for snow days or my being out of class for a conference or something, although generally we have class online on those days. So it just depends, okay? So this is broken down exactly that way, so that we have, what I've shown you is day 1, day 2, all the way through day 7 or day 8. And day 8 is the culminating activity, all right? So if we look at the first one, what happens is that I always introduce something. And what I tried to do was go ahead and start to put all of them into English so that I could show you today what it was that I do. So generally, okay, so here we have the flip. This is for a second semester class. It's about during weeks 10 and 11, I would say. And we want to incorporate all 4 skills: listening, reading, speaking, and writing. But in addition to that, we also want to give them cultural knowledge and understanding. Each of the chapters in the book focuses on at least one country, sometimes more. This particular chapter includes Nicaragua and El Salvador. And in addition to that, I bring in Spain because the cultures are completely different in all the different countries. So I want them to see and be able to compare and contrast those countries with what they have here, okay? And then there are other activities which, if I have time, I'll go into those, but the activities that are provided here are not necessarily the only things that we do. And we'll see how that works, all right? So I always start off with an introduction in Spanish. Everything, my classes starting with Spanish 1 are completely in Spanish, okay? Because I figure if they start hearing it right away, then the better off they are, okay? This one's in English, though. And it's basically what I tell them in Spanish. Sorry, I forgot we shut the audio off.
Welcome to Chapter 5, La Casa, the house. In this chapter, we will be discussing the house and housing. First, we will look at the parts of a house. For example, what are the different rooms inside and outside, and the furniture that you will find in those rooms. Next, we will hear about a couple's house in Spain and what each of them likes and dislikes about that house. Then, we will also look at some houses for sale and rooms to rent. Do you prefer to live in a house with roommates, an apartment with roommates, or by yourself, in a dormitorio? These are things that you will consider before making your final decision. While working on this chapter, you will learn vocabulary and grammar that will allow you to talk about your ideal house. You also will be able to compare and contrast the houses and housing here in the United States with houses and housing in other countries such as Spain, Mexico, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to talk about your preferences and try to win your ideal house. Enjoy the chapter, and I can't wait to hear about that house.
Okay, so they get that information in Spanish. They also get at the beginning of your handout, you'll see that I put down the topic, communicative objectives, grammar points, and the final goal. They have that right in their electronic, what we call it's their course management system, but it's the electronic workbook for the specific textbook that I use. So they have this here so that they know what the expectations are, they know what our objectives are, and they know what our final goal is, which is being able to talk about their ideal house, being able to talk about those different parts of that house, and being able to even compare, well, do I want to live in a foreign country? Do I want to live in the United States? What do I want to do? Where do I want to have that house? Or do I want to have more than one house? Maybe that's the case, okay? So if we look at day 1, and what I did for here was just put day 1 on there because it would take me forever to go through the whole thing. But, so if we look at day 1, we have the objectives for the chapter, the practice of the vocabulary, then to do day one activities, and they have this on, I prepare for them a daily calendar so that they have, they know exactly what's in class, what their outside of class work is, and what their homework is. Okay, so there's never any question of what they should have. The homework, sometimes they get behind in it, but they know that it's not being graded until, that part is not being graded until the end of the chapter. So they know to at least keep up with the outside of class stuff if they have to get behind in something. Don't get behind in the outside of class. If I have to, I'll get behind in the other, which is the practice of it. Okay? So they have the day one activities, they have them in Connected. I'm going to, I think I'll show you a couple of those. I give them grammar explanations. The book provides grammar explanations by video in Spanish, and therefore it makes no sense for me to also provide them the same grammar explanation in Spanish. I use what's already provided by the book. Okay? What I do is I take those grammar explanations, I give them something in writing with more practice that includes whatever the chapter topic is. And then do a furnished apartment, which is a listening activity. It's usually the hardest part for them because the Spanish is very fast, very, very fast for them. But it's a great activity because they come into class and we do some stuff with it. Okay, before we go to SRTEs, let me bring up the electronic workbook quickly here. We had some tech issues, so I had to change computers. That's why this isn't up yet. Okay, so what happens, I'm trying to get my students to go enter a contest here. What happens here is that for the vocabulary practice, they literally go into their library, and they have all this in writing, but they go into their library, and then theirs will say student resources. It's the same thing as my teacher resources, and actually what I've done is I can bookmark things for them. So the vocab, I usually bookmark for them so that they can see it. Maybe. All right, I'm going to see if this will load, but as it's loading, I'm going to keep talking. The textbook I'm using is good in the sense that it is literally made so that it's very easy to flip your classroom. There is literally an audio thing to do recordings right in the textbook, so I don't have to go to any outside source. I can record right there and set it as the lecture, and they can listen to it, they can repeat it, they can, they can fast forward, they can go back and listen to other things that they need to listen to, etc., etc. Then I can create my own activities and place those right in there. I can place web activities right in there, any web activities that I might have for them right in there. And then there is the different parts of the workbook that I use, even though it's a workbook, I use it as part of their learning, such as what's called Learn Smart. And it's a short practice that is usually between 10 and 20 minutes long of vocabulary practice, and then 10, or usually between 5 and 15 minutes long for the grammar practice. And you choose what you want them to study, what you don't want them to study. In my textbook, I set up my notebook here, maybe. All right, it says it's empty. I set up my notebook, and when I set up my notebook, what I can do is I can mark, I can literally put a note within the chapter for them to go and look at certain things or certain parts of their assignment. I know what happened there. Okay. me. Okay, so in their book, the system is working very slowly. All right, so what happens is in their textbook, and what I did mark for this presentation was what I wanted them to focus on for this first day is the vocabulary just for rooms. I didn't want them to worry about the other vocab, just for rooms, because also within this chapter is days of the weeks, different reflexive verbs. I didn't want them to be focusing on that for this. What I wanted them to do is just focus literally on the vocabulary for furniture and for the rooms, okay? It doesn't look like this is loading, so I'm going to continue. So if we look at this, we have, as you can see, vocabulary, review of the vocabulary related to the house, and also the days of the week just to recycle. So my question might be, in class, might be, what part of the house do you like to be in over the weekends? So they might say, in the study. And then a follow-up question might be, what do you do in the study? And they'll say, watch TV, read a book, talk to my friends, play video games, etc., etc., which is all recycled vocabulary because they've had all that vocabulary in Spanish 1. At least we hope that they've had it in Spanish 1, or from high school if they're coming from high school, okay? So we do a review of the vocabulary, or they do a review of the vocabulary, then they do vocabulary repetition, which pulls it out of the classroom, for those faculty that, instructors that have, just have them repeat the vocab over, you say it, they say it, et cetera, et cetera. It's on tape so they can do it here. They don't have to do it in the classroom. And then vocabulary identification. And what that is they are given like a floor plan, and this is going to lead into the fact that they're going to be creating a floor plan during class, okay? So they're given a floor plan and they have to mark the rooms. And then the second part is they're given a floor plan, and instead of the rooms, they have to mark things that are in the rooms. Okay, it's just more practice on the vocabulary, all right? And then the grammar, they watch a grammar tutorial, for example, present tense verbs or present tense stem changing verbs. And then they'll do the same thing with reflexives. Although we won't necessarily use those directly on day 2 or during the in-class, they have it so that at least it's in memory, in their memory, so that if they hear me using it or they hear another student using it, they know what's happening, okay? And then finally they have a listening activity, which is what I was telling you about, and this listening activity where they are going to hear a conversation between 2 roommates and what the roommates like or what the roommates need and don't need for their apartment. They're given a floor plan, and then they're given some discussion questions. I have them do it outside of class. Then they come in, and we discuss what it was that they heard or didn't hear. I use the audio in class again as a refresher for them, just in case they want to be able to jot anything else down. And then we take that and we continue it by saying, and you, say that you're moving to University Park. What are you going to need for your room? So we'll just pair work, and then we'll do some full class work, okay? So that's day 1, and you can see that day 1 focuses on listening more than anything else, okay? So if we look at day 2, which is the in-class, and that's as far as we'll go with this part here. Let me see if I can bring up my notebook here. Okay, this is what I was talking about for the vocabulary. In their textbook is electronic. So they do their textbook right online too. So the first thing here is rooms and parts of the rooms. So it gives them the vocabulary that says rooms and other parts of the house, okay? They take this, and there's audio that goes along with it, and they can listen and follow along. And then they do the same thing with the furniture and other parts of other things, okay? So it's literally just a practice for them. So then day 2, they come into class, and the very first thing that I do is I introduce what we're going to be doing, and they get everything in writing in Spanish, okay? I clarify anything that they might want to know, because we are only talking about Spanish 2, right? So it's not that they're going to understand the idea, everything that I'm going to say. But the idea is that through the context, they can tell what it is that I'm expecting out of them, okay? So I spend 5 minutes answering any questions that they might have, and then we do a 5-minute smartboard activity. I have a smartboard in my room, in my classroom. I teach in a computer classroom. That's the one thing I didn't say. I do have a computer lab that I fought for 5 years and finally got. So we have a smartboard. We do a quick 5-minute smartboard activity. And then after that, again, it's just a review of the vocabulary to have it fresh in their mind. Okay? Then we go into World of Diversity, and this is the activity that they're going to be doing. World of Diversity is a virtual learning environment that I created in 2001 that was funded by by University College, or $5,000 was given to me to work on it and set it up through University College when Sandy Gleason was there, was dean. And what World of Diversity is, pull it up here, it's this learning environment. And what I've created is I've created my house. So the activity that they're going to be doing is they're going to visit my house and see what I have there, all right? The idea being is that they're going to create a floor plan, and I start them in the hallway. They enter, and you'll see on the left-hand side it says, or on the second column, left-hand side, it says Beth, C, okay? And it says the different things that you see. You're going to see lots of objects there that wouldn't necessarily be there when they're there. I'm sort of testing things out and playing with things. And then, since it's my house, that's where I do all that playing. So then you see enlaces over here, and these are links. And those links are what brings you to different rooms, okay? So they start off, and what they're going to be doing is they're going to be doing an activity that you say room, and what do you find in that room, okay? What's on the left, what's on the right, et cetera, what's straight ahead. So here it tells them that you're a person that's very curious and wants to know what's here. So you see that there's, you have some doors, and I can't read it up there, my eyesight's not very good. You see 2 doors on each side and a door at the very end. So you have door, 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 and door, okay? And those are what the links will take you to. So you go to each one of these different links, you'll get a description of what's in those rooms. I try to write the descriptions that are very vivid so they can literally see it without pictures, and that's the idea, is to see it without pictures. However, there's sometimes that you want them to be able to see a picture because they don't have the slightest idea what it is that you're talking about. I bet this is already timed out. So if they go to the recreation room, there's going to be some objects there that you can play with, you can manipulate. Like you can make yourself a cup of coffee. You can see the description of a gigantic tabby cat. You can see a cage that has lovebirds in it. They don't know the word for cage, so of course there is an ASCII picture of a cage there. So things like this that will help them understand vocabulary that they don't know. So they're reading, they're marking, they're jotting down new vocabulary that will enhance it when they, at the end, when they're writing their own ideal house, or when they're talking about their ideal house. Okay? Questions? We okay? All right. Since we're running a little bit behind here. Okay, so this brings us to what does this do? And I left this as one whole sheet there in the sense that, let's see, okay. SRTEs. I know some of you have flipped classrooms or have flipped. And so I don't know if you saw a big difference in SRTE scores, but many times you will. I went to a presentation for the arts and humanities, and there was someone there, it was arts and humanities and social sciences. And the faculty member there was saying that she saw a big drop in her SRTs when she flipped her classroom for the first time, okay? And I think it's automatic because your students don't expect it. They expect the traditional classroom, they come in, they listen to a lecture, they go home, do their homework, come in, listen to a lecture, et cetera, et cetera. So here's what happened with ours. Before the flip, the overall course was 5.83, the average, okay? Then the overall instructor was 6.2, right? But then we see something drastic happen. After the flip, for 2011, overall course drops to 5.23, and the overall instructor to 5.67, all right? But then post-2011, and I made some changes at that time, because I don't think I was super clear what I was expecting, at least from student comments I wasn't. The overall course started to go up to 5.62, and the instructor to 5.82. So they're starting to raise. I can say that this semester is completely different, and in that difference is that I have students that are very willing to try anything this year for some reason. So I'm hoping that that means that the culture is starting to change a little bit, that students are getting used to this. Okay, so just a couple of student reactions. The negative ones, I have to take this course. Who cares if I can speak it or not? I would rather just do activities straight from the book and be through with it. Okay, that was a very common reaction. Way too much work. She only speaks Spanish in class and I don't understand. Why do I have to learn this anyway? Okay, that probably would have happened on either a flipped or a not flipped class. And then use the book activities and forget about practicing. I'm never going to use it anyway. Okay? But there were some positives. And the positive reactions, this class is different than other Spanish classes I have had. In high school, we just went page by page and I didn't learn a lot. Here I have to use it. A lot of work, but I like it. I like the way this class is set up. We get to talk a lot and have fun, okay? Sometimes it is hard to keep up, but it's okay. I thought I was going to hate this class, but I don't. It is a lot of work, but I can actually understand some Spanish when I hear it now. Speaking is hard, but the instructor is very encouraging. And that's the main thing, as all of you know, that the thing in a language classroom is you have to try to make them as comfortable as possible. And knowing that it's very different for them, allow for those differences. And then just questions. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
So it wasn't just your classes, it was like your whole department, this is your department too?
My whole department is me.
Okay.
So, yeah, it is. I am the only one that teaches languages. We're a small campus, and we only offer Spanish. So that's the other issue we have, is the fact that we have lots of students that don't really want to take Spanish because they took French in high school or whatever. So we also battle that. So, Jackie?
What were your strategies when students would come not prepared?
The first thing I always try to do when they come and they're not prepared is, I can usually be able to tell that from that first 5 minutes. Because if they come in and they can't do the vocabulary review, then there is sort of an issue. So my strategy is to try to change and put them into more mixed groups. That I have some students that are able to circumlocute and be able to explain a word. So if they don't know chair, there might be a student that will point to a chair and say, you know, this is a chair, and do it that way. If I need to spend a little bit extra time on vocab, I do. Generally, I just go with it, and usually they don't come unprepared the next time, because if they can't, they also know that they're getting participation. That's a big thing when you flip your classroom. Participation becomes a major component of the class. Whereas in a lecture class, it may not be as large of a percentage. Participation in my class is now 20% of their grade. And so if they're not participating, we have a system where they do self-evaluation at the end of every class online, and they give themselves a grade for participation. They have the rubric for it. And then they know that I can go in, because if they give themselves 100% for participation, they haven't said a word, or I've heard them speaking in English half the time, I go in and lower that grade. And they know that it's better that they're honest. 99% of the time, they're harder on themselves than I am anyway, but I'm circulating the whole time, so they know that I know who's participating and who's not. So come to class prepared, you'll be fine. Don't come to class prepared, you're going to have some problems. Other questions?
I was just wondering, is all of your supplementary material that you put online, is that all in Spanish? Or
Yes.
So
It's,
everything is 100%, both in the classroom and outside?
no. Let me restate that. Many times my explanations are, like if it's a grammar point, especially if it's a difficult one, the explanation is English. The textbook is also explanations are in English for grammar points. That way they do understand at least what the concept is, but all the practice is in Spanish.
So you guys put earlier that with regard to grammar, you have minimal instruction in grammar.
Yes.
Everything we learn by themselves. So when you compare that to the old or the traditional way of teaching, in their writing, their composition paragraph, do you see more errors? Notice a difference in terms of
No,
application of the grammar?
not really, and I'll tell you the reasons, because they've been practicing, and I have a thing I don't explicitly tell a student that they're wrong, but I will repeat it correctly, and I find that students will pick up on those, or they'll come to me after class and pick up on it that way. So no, I have not seen any difference. We do drafts and then rewrites, so they get a lot of comments on the drafts about, be careful with your verbs, et cetera, et cetera. So there hasn't been.
So minimal explicit teaching of grammar.
I have always done minimal explicit teaching of grammar, because for me that's drill and kill, and it's something that they can learn on their own. It's not something that they necessarily have to have me explicitly saying, here's a verb paradigm, let's fill it out. I don't believe in verb paradigms in the first place, because I think that that makes them learn things in order rather than when it's needed. So I guess for me, there hasn't been a problem, just because I've just never I tried never to explicitly teach grammar anyway.
Thank you everyone for coming. We are out of time, and I'm sure well, Debbie's packing up. If there are other questions,
Absolutely.
You can stop up here.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.